Hello and welcome to Anything But Ordinary. Yes, that's right, it's me. You're not hallucinating. Tonight's topic, a viewer's request, Haunted Massachusetts. I am your host, Vicky, along with your other most awesome host, Raven.
Right. And welcome to Anything But Ordinary. You forgot to say that part. It's been so long.
Oh, well.
You're like, it's me.
It's been a while.
They're like, who's me? I don't know. Yes, Anything But Ordinary. We're back. We've been gone for a while just because we have a lot of life stuff going on, and then you were sick for
Yeah, I've been sick almost the entire month of October with bacterial pneumonia, and that stuff's hard to kick, so it hasn't been a good month for me so far. Maybe tonight it will change.
Be positive, right?
Be positive.
Yeah. No, I was, it was a strange couple of weeks here myself, keep having all these people reaching out to me and saying, are you okay? And keep having this feeling or a vision or you're gonna die or stuff like that. And it's weird because it's coming from multiple people who don't even talk to each other or know each other. And I was thinking it would make for kind of an interesting show if we did something about on, not that I believe I'm gonna die, but do something on precognitive visions or intuitive abilities and things. And because it seems like a lot of people get that type of feeling or see something before it happens, and I think maybe that might make for an interesting show.
Well, it might. Maybe we can get someone on here that can I don't know, with a psychic or somebody.
Oh, with those abilities and stuff.
Yeah.
I just, all these people kept reaching out to me for a few weeks now, and they're just random people out of the blue. They're like, are you okay? And I'm like, yeah, why? And they're like, I just have this overwhelming feeling like something bad's going to happen to you. And so.
And that's just what you want to hear, isn't it?
Yeah, I know. I'm like, no.
Thank you for, I'm fine. Thank you for your concern.
Yeah, say a prayer for me, Tonight's topic, again, and I just want to say, you guys, we're gonna try to come back more frequently because the things that me and Spooky have been going on in our separate lives with our daily activity and stuff, it seems to be settling down. So we're hoping to start.
Oh yeah, finally, thank God.
Yeah, start back up again or whatever. But we just want to say sorry, we've been gone a long time. But you know how life is, work and family and job, all that stuff. It comes first.
I know, real life just has to come first. It just has to.
Yeah, although we love doing this stuff. But tonight's topic, for you guys, it's one of our many recurring themes that we have, where we basically are going to try to cover all the states in the U.S. of all the different haunted locations.
Oh yeah, we chose tonight because, to be honest with you, it's our first night back, and we just wanna kind of go on the light side a little bit. But when you hear about Massachusetts, I know a lot of you think of the Salem witch trials, or Lizzie Borden house, or maybe Pilgrims, but when you stop and think about it, actually Massachusetts basically was the beginning of this country.
Yeah, I'm laughing because when I think of Massachusetts, I don't think of Pilgrims, but I think of all these haunted spots.
Well, Pilgrims, Paul Revere.
Yeah, historical stuff.
There's a lot of history up there. A lot of history.
Right. Well, we did do a show previously, kind of touching a little bit on Massachusetts when we did that Bridgewater Triangle thing.
Oh yeah.
Because remember when we did the Freetown Fall River State Forest and the Hoosac Swamp and things like that. I mean,
yeah.
When we did the research for that show and we talked, that was probably one of my favorite ones, just because I think Fall River State Forest is just amazing, in Freetown, because there's so many things that are going on. You have the paranormal, you have the UFO sightings, they have animal mutilation, strange creatures, like Bigfoots and Thunderbirds and things like that. You had people just randomly disappearing to odd, black military choppers and everything. I mean, that area in Massachusetts is creepy,
Yeah, and the listeners, I mean, you guys should go and check that podcast out as well. I think the title of it is Vile Vortexes.
No,
Tonight after the show, if you love the paranormal and strangeness, I really believe you'll enjoy that one.
it's called the Bridgewater and the Bentington Triangle and the Vile Vortices. It's got we'll put the link in eventually for you guys so you can check it out or whatever. But when it comes to like the Falls River State Forest, I mean, that to me, I think is probably one of the creepiest places probably in the whole, for me, that I think of from after reading up on everything. And even though it has like a ton of things that are happening there, I would still go camping. I would still go there and camp out, even if I like ran into Bigfoot and Dogman and aliens and the Puckawudgies and stuff. They have those there. I mean, there's just so much stuff going on. I want to see it.
I think I would probably go camping there too. I mean, just to see what goes on. But we'll tag the link to that podcast, so to this video tonight for you guys to go and check it out later on. I have to say that Massachusetts will be another one we end up doing several times, though, for the Haunted State series. I mean, there's just so much up there, and it
was hard to pick.
I know, and it's one of the oldest places in the United States, as far as settlers and stuff. It's not the oldest. Well, the oldest town I think is in Florida, but it's just has so much history up there. I love history.
Yeah,
and there are so many places that it was just so hard to pick which ones to talk about tonight.
Yeah, well, I agree, but what I ended up doing, I just picked the ones that I thought were kind of interesting, where I could kind of see myself going there first, or making sure I hit up the place. Some of them are going to be popular that you guys probably heard a bunch of times, and maybe some of these nobody's ever heard of. It's really hard to say since we're all kind of into the paranormal. That's why we all found each other. But like you said, I like I like this place just because there is a lot of history, historical buildings still standing up. And it's good to kind of know the history behind something, because then you kind of know why there's strange things that could possibly be occurring there,
Right.
There was but we also need to kind of do a cryptid show on this state, because I was stumbling across a ton of people talking about having Dogman and Bigfoot encounters as well.
Right. It's what's the word I want? It's not exactly a hot spot, but it's pretty close to it. I mean, there are just all kinds of Bigfoot and Dogman sightings around in the area, and I tell you the truth, I would like to go up there just to visit the cemeteries. They got some of the oldest cemeteries in the country, and I don't know, cemetery art and stuff like that, and just interests me.
Yeah. There was this one Dogman, though, I was reading, was in, Worcester County or something like that. And it was actually...
Worcester is the way they pronounce it.
Yeah, it was creepy because this thing was stalking two little kids.
Mm-hmm.
And this thing was coming right up to the window. And they were telling their parents, like, oh, it's a bear, the bear man, because, I mean, how do you relate this to your parents when you're, like, 7 and not, or 5 and 7,
right.
You know what I mean? But...
Right.
Tonight, you guys, for those who haven't ever tuned in, what we do is we talk a little bit on the history of each location, as well as like the supposed reports of, the paranormal encounters. But Spooky, why don't you go ahead and start us off for tonight? And you guys just bear with us. We're a little rusty. We're just trying to get back into the swing of talking. But thanks for tuning in, you guys, and sharing us with others. And hopefully you'll enjoy what we picked tonight. So go ahead, Spooky.
Okay. Oh, thank you. I think I will. My first pick is Harold Parker State Forest, and it's at 305 North Middleton Road in North Hanover, Massachusetts. Now, this is a publicly owned forest, and it offers many different recreational features, such as camping and fishing and hiking and non-motorized bike trails, etc. I mean, this place really has it all. It's over 3,000 acres, with the largest sections being in North Andover and Andover. Those are two separate towns. It used to be one, but now they're two separate. But there are smaller sections in or near Reading and Middleton, Massachusetts. And there are 56 miles of backwoods roads and trails, as well as 11 ponds and numerous campsites in this place. And another feature to this state forest is throughout the forest, there are remnants of farming and milling operations, because actually this forest used to be a small town. And, all from the 18th century. And some of the old buildings are still standing, even though they're like 100 plus years old. And, actually after 100 plus years after being abandoned, I should say. Now, this forest really has too many features and an extensive history. And I cannot possibly get into it all, so we will post a link so you can read about it for yourself. I found it interesting, but like I said, I love history. The land dates back to the Ice Age, and this is proven by all the glacial erratics throughout the forest. Now, a glacial erratic is a rock or a boulder of a different shape and a different kind from all the others in the area where it rests. So when you go through here, you might see pieces of granite or some other kind of stone, but you'll see these huge glacial boulders. And these boulders were carried and can be carried, or pushed by a glacier up to and over 100 miles. So there's really no telling they're really not sure where these boulders were pushed from. Now, even though Native Americans were present in New England for over 10,000 years and in this forest for at least 7,000 years, very little really is known about them because there are no written records for that period. And most of the information about them is from archaeological digs, of which there are several in the area. And along with sites believed to be a stone working shop, and then they found a place where they think, is where they built the canoes. Mm-hmm. And there have even been human burials found that date from 5,000, to 350 years ago.
Did they leave them there, or did they move
As far as I know, they left them there. And those weren't the only human burials they found. I mean, they found numerous unmarked graves when they developed this forest. So, back then, and it only stands to reason because they did it like back then, when people passed away, they just buried them on the farm or on the land, or the local cemetery, whatever. When Europeans came over and started claiming land, then the Native Americans really were more or less forced out. And most of them died from these new diseases brought by the settlers, like smallpox, influenza, diphtheria. And in fact, the Native American population lost 80 to 90% of their people by the middle 1600s. Only about 300 Native American adults were still in the area at that time. Also, with the land grants and everything, by the newly formed government, many farms, sprung up in the area, and one of them was the Osgood family, who owned one of the biggest farms. It was about 500 acres, and Mary Osgood was one of the several from the area who was charged, tried, and imprisoned for witchcraft during the Salem witch trials. There were several different big farms in the area, and also a man named Jenkins, built a sawmill. Now, it should be, really, I should note right here that when Massachusetts, when the area was first settled, Massachusetts was about 80% timber, but by the time the farms and businesses were abandoned, the area was about 20% timber. This is how much they I don't know the word I want, but they just cut down all these trees. They just almost literally did away with the forest there.
Yeah, they did that in a lot of places, though, like in Africa and everywhere else.
That's true. And, but timber, of course, the settlers and everybody, whatever, were coming over. So there was a high demand for timber, and especially during the post-Civil War days. Now, in 1914, the land was purchased by the Commonwealth for almost nothing, specifically for the purpose to create this state forest. Mm-hmm. And because at the time, the Commonwealth was buying up what they called wasteland, and that's what this area was at the time. It was deemed wasteland to repurpose it. And at the time, the newly created Civilian Conservation Corps, which was an organization formed at the time to give people jobs that were, out of work and stuff.
Yeah.
They were given the task to turn it into the forest that it is today. I mean, they planted trees and other plants, and they maintained the roads and the trails. They built 9 of the 11 ponds there. They built retaining walls from stone. They built the campsites, and they also preserved what houses and buildings that remained. Now, they pretty much did everything, to make this place, to make this a place that people would love to visit over and over again. And it actually does get a lot of business, a lot of visitors there. And as I said before, this place has an extensive and interesting history, and I know that I have just not given it justice.
Right. But you don't know if there was any, people who were killed there or whatnot. You just know.
It really didn't go into that. The biggest thing was the Native Americans. I mean, the Native Americans were literally in the thousands. And by the time the middle 1600s came around, there was only like 300 of them left.
Yeah. And
they eventually kind of, some of them eventually moved out of the area. Now, this was all before the Revolutionary War.
Right.
I mean, by the time that came around, I mean, the Native Americans were pissed.
Well,
but
to put it lightly, yes.
To put it lightly, yeah.
I mean, that's like an understatement. But I do know that it seems like when I was doing a lot of my research, I came across, it seemed like so many state forests and parks and stuff that are in Massachusetts have a lot of paranormal activity to UFO and all that stuff, especially like
a lot of them are actually man-made too.
Yeah. Doesn't mean that things can't happen,
Well, exactly. And that's true. Now, the hauntings in this place, and there seems to be paranormal activity throughout this forest. I mean, near the retaining walls and the dig sites, there are these people claim are mysterious glowing green lights. There are voices. There's also the feelings of being watched. Apparitions of Native Americans and settlers have been seen in different areas by both hikers and bikers and even campers. As a matter of fact, campers have reported that they hear these footsteps around in their campsites, up near their tents or their campers or whatever. And when they investigate, they just don't find anybody. And it just seems like, from what I was reading, there's just pretty much, most of this forest, there is just some sort of paranormal activity taking place.
Reminds me of that, remember when we did Hawaii, some stuff in Hawaii, and a lot of people were being harassed, but they said it was by the little people or whatever. But it makes you wonder, what are the things that these people are hearing and seeing? And the thing that I always find interesting is those glowing lights, Mm-hmm. I know there's certain places that people tend to see them all the time, and I don't know if they're like 100% like paranormal, because it's really hard to say, but I always want to figure out what's creating it. Is it like something in the environment? I mean, does it mean, is it just energy, people have said or is it a spirit? I mean, some people think that. I don't think it's a spirit per se, but it may. Well,
some people say that, they'll be walking along these stone walls, which are still there, mm-hmm. And these lights just appear out of nowhere. And they just seem to, just float around these walls and stuff, and around the archaeological digs. And like I said before, there are a lot of, they did find Native American burials there. They did find unmarked graves of settlers.
Well, yeah,
So
but when you disturb someone's,
when you disturb someone's grave,
I'm sure that stirs up
you
something.
it stirs up their spirit. In some cases, I'm not saying that happens all the time.
Yeah, it's definitely sounds, well, there's a lot more photos, but we can only share the ones that you have the okay to share. But we always put in links for you guys who are new in our references after the show where we show where there's far more detail on everything we're talking about, because some of these places, like one place alone could take up a whole 2 hours, so we try to like compress it and make it a little smaller.
If I had not paraphrased this, and like I said, I know I did not give the history of this place justice, you know, but it time-wise,
yeah,
you know, because of tonight's topic. But one of the links that we're posting, there is an extensive history of this place there. Yeah. And it even tells all the families that were there.
Too. Yeah.
Yeah, and a lot more photos.
Yeah. Plus, we're a little rusty starting because it's been like, what? A long time.
We've been 3 months, whatever.
I don't even know. We've been gone a long time. So we apologize for that, but hopefully we're going to be coming back. But one of the ones I picked, I kind of picked this one for a reason, is because a long while ago, I don't even know how long ago, I saw this movie called Session 9. And I mean, it's not like the best movie out there, but I mean, I still liked it for what it was. But it was filmed here at the Danvers State Hospital. And after watching the movie, which they filmed a lot of it in the hospital, I got really curious on the history of this place. So I started doing a little research back in the day and stuff, and still did some more here recently for the show. But it was during the late 1800s that Danvers and, you know, a couple other nearby areas were in need of a facility that could, you know, house the growing population of those that they termed as mentally ill. Because back then, I mean, anybody could have been tossed into one of these facilities, you know what I mean? But,
right.
Although, I know back in the day, back then, during the 1800s and things like that, I mean, it was basically the community's job to kind of look after these people. And there were times where you could actually, you know, there was issues where, you know, I kind of read about this, where you could actually purchase these people as slaves, like purchase a person individually and use them for labor. You know, I don't know how the government owns these people who are just randomly walking around the town that they deem mentally ill, and then you give them so much money and then all of a sudden you own this person. But, you know, a lot of times they were supposed to use them as extra help or labor, but a lot of times they would end up, you know, chaining them to a wall, putting them in these shoddy cages or whatever, just beating them or letting them walk around naked. I mean, it was just really awful what happened to a lot of these people back in the day. And I think that's why a lot of times they wanted to start making these huge facilities, you know, to kind of, one, take care of these people, and, you know, two, out of sight, out of mind type of thing. But anyway, it wasn't just Danvers. You know, this was occurring all over. But in 1873, you know, they decided they were going to have this psychiatric hospital built. So they kind of purchased this land over on Hawthorne Hill from this guy named Dodge. Well, I think they almost got almost 200 acres. It was like 197 acres or so, which they ended up purchasing from this guy, you know, his farmland. And now, according to different websites that I was reading, they said that the place that they ended up choosing was also once owned by this guy named John Hawthorne, who was one of the judges at the Salem witch trials. And they claimed that in this area, as well as, you know, other places in Massachusetts, they ended up having other dark things occur there during those witch trials. So they were saying some things on this land happened too. Because of that, true or not, you know, I can't say for fact. I'm just kind of letting you guys know this is things that they're talking about on the internet. But they say that this might play into part of the reasons why there is some dark energy that contributes to this area. But anyway, the construction for the state lunatic hospital facility, it started like in 1874 and it completed in 1878. And I think it was in like May of that year is when they first admitted their first patient. Now, they say the hospital is kind of like built from, you know, brick and granite, and had like that whole Gothic style where it kind of looked like this huge castle on the hill, you know. But they said they had like 2 main buildings that were used kind of for the staff administration, and then they had like these 4 wards that were kind of branching off like in wings, and which they had attached to the main buildings. But the hospital, like many other ones back then, they were all self-sustaining for basically on their own, where they had their own kitchen, their laundry, their gardens, machine shop, animal farming and things like that. And as the years passed, of course, the hospital structure continued to grow with over 40 buildings on the property. Now, many of them were actually connected by underground tunnel systems, and a lot of the nurses and doctors and whoever used to use that at times, sometimes during the winter when they couldn't drive all the way up there. And the hospital was designed to house somewhere, I believe, what they were saying, like around 400 to 500. My cat's acting up again. Every time we do a show, he's like, "Oh, I gotta start pounding."
He's gotta get it. He's gotta get his fame in.
I know. It's about 400 to 500 patients. But they said during the 30s, 1930s and 40s, the hospital ended up having somewhere around 4,000 patients and staff. And due to the overcrowding, a lot of the patients ended up having to sleep in the underground tunnels and in the basement. And the people who were put down there are probably pretty much forgot about,
Right.
And then in 1939, it was said that 278 people had died in the hospital, which is kind of a big chunk of people to die in 1 year, for...
yeah, in one place, in one hospital, yeah.
Yeah, a facility like this.
Right.
But like other facilities around the state, Danvers had its issues, too, with abuse as well, because people said that during its years of operation, that the patients began to outgrow the number of the staff, which seemed to be a common factor, you know what I mean? But the ability to care for these people completely declined because of that. And patients were oftentimes left in their own filth. They were naked all the time. Other ones were in straitjackets 24/7 all the time, or they were tied to their beds, In 1948, I was reading, they began performing lobotomies on patients. And in the 50s, they started introducing shock therapy. Now, many who had lobotomies done to them basically became true life zombies, wandering the hospital, staring blankly, while other people were just over sedated and, basically a comatose like state. Patients were being assaulted by staff members or by other patients. I was reading a report where one person was in restraints and was actually assaulted by a staff, and he was just covered in bruises, like from top to bottom. And you can imagine how painful that would have been. There was another report that I read where one of the staff was on top of the patient choking them, because the guy was just, this one guy that I was reading about, he had report after report after report he was written up on for constantly abusing the patients. There was a newspaper article that came out in the 30s where 2 men who worked for the hospital were given a year in jail for assaulting a 53-year-old man. They broke his ribs and just, caused him a lot of other injuries. And they ended up going to jail for a year, but it makes you wonder how many other people got away with...
Only a year?
Yeah. In 1934, there was another article that was talking about several patients getting sick and one of them dying due to their food being poisoned. There was rat poison put in to their food. And this is newspaper articles I was finding. There's like tons of stuff that was going on. There's another article in 1938 where they talked about 8 patients died brutally due to the hands of other patients. So, of course, other patients are murdering patients and stuff. But,
well, when you're overcrowded like that, 4,000 patients,
that's patients and staff. You're
going to get it. That's going to happen. There's going to be a lot of brutality.
Well, yeah, I mean,
between patients.
Well, and staff people were doing it. Not everybody, but, the facilities back then, patients were beaten, they were sexually abused. I mean, it wasn't uncommon to hear these stories like this. You also have patients that were, died there from just a variety of things. I read a report where this man, he's like, I'm doing better. Can you please let me go work out? Because you know how they had a lot of patients who would go, they would run the animal farms, they would, do the gardening, right, mow the lawns, do everything, and they're like, okay, yeah, we'll let you do gardening work or whatever. Well, the first time he was out, he was like, oh, working with the other guys, and then he just you know, ran towards one of the buildings, climbed up to the roof, and he was up on about 80 feet above the ground, and, you know, all the staff were coming out, and they're trying to talk him down, and it's been an hour, and he's like, no, you know, and they're like, hold on, I gotta let the cat out. They're like, they called his wife and his brother to come to see if maybe they could talk him down from, you know, jumping, and as soon as his wife and his brother show up and everything else, you know, they had ladders and a life-saving net out to try to catch him. The guy jumps. He literally jumped, and they caught him in the net. But because of the speed and the weight, you know, he didn't make it. He still hit the ground. I think he died like an hour and a half after that. But there was another report where I read about they used to let the patients go up and down like this elevator, but it was the open type of elevator, you know, where it was exposed all the way around. Well, according to this newspaper article, this is how this man died. Doesn't mean that's exactly how he could die. He could have died at somebody else's hands. But they claimed that he fainted while he was in the elevator, and he hit his head on the first one of the floors while it was going up or going down or whatever.
Oh my.
In 1941, I read a report where this huge fire occurred in the hospital cattle barns. You know, one of the barns was just burning, and one of the nearby dormitory buildings, I guess you would call it, it's like one of the 3-story building ones, that started to catch on fire because of the barn going up. But some of the patients and some of the staff ended up quickly putting that one out. But many of the cows, you know, they were saved, but they never did figure out how that building caught on fire. But I was reading reports like how a lot of people got injured and some may have died because of that. But there was an article where a woman somehow set her mattress on fire in the ward with all the dangerous people in there, and people got hurt. So these are just some of probably, who knows, hundreds of things that probably you know, occurred in there, you know, and I just thought I would include this because I think it's interesting. I think it makes a point to what kind of was going on in there to help us all understand why there might be paranormal activity going on. But, you know, like me and Spooky say, we're always going to be posting a link where you guys can go read more on this stuff as well, because there's so much detail on this place. I'm also going to be posting a link where you can read all these different newspaper articles and stuff that's talking about all the crazy stuff that went on there. But, you know, due to the lack of funding for these state was declining, the hospital had to close down some of their wards and stuff due to, you know, structural issues going down because they couldn't keep up the building over the years, you know. So a lot of patients ended up being sent off to another facility, and, you know, big chunks of this hospital was closed off by, you know, 1985, and I think it was in 1992 is when the whole facility basically shut down, and the patients were either transferred to another facility or they were just released out to the community, like, see you later, you know, which that happens a lot.
That happened a lot.
Yeah, they just send them out, and, you know, crazy stuff happens. But I did read that in, like, 1984, the hospital was put on the National Registry of Historic Places, but for 13 years, this place sat vacant. And I think it was like somewhere in 2000, that's when that movie Session 9 was filmed there. But in 2005, they tried to catch him with a net. Yeah, but it didn't work. But in 2000, I was reading someone's question in chat. Sorry, guys, for few people who are listening and not reading chat. But in 2005, the property was purchased by a group, I think it was like Avalon Bay or something. They purchased it for like $18 million. And what they ended up doing is they started to demolish a lot of these buildings, and they ended up gutting them out, but kind of leaving like the main structure in order to build like apartments and condominiums and things like that. And there was like a lawsuit filed against them to try to stop them to save the building because it was put on the National Registry, but for whatever reasons.
I know. I thought when a building was put on the National Registry that
you can't
historic registry that you can't do stuff like that.
Yeah, but somehow somebody slipped enough bucks down, I guess, that got them to get the permits. So anyway, a lot of the stuff was tore down or gutted, but during the construction period, you know, random fires broke out, I guess, and it destroyed parts of the new and older structures. But another group ended up purchasing this place a few years after these guys, and they bought it for like 108 million, and then they changed the name. I think the place is now called Danvers State Hospital. But the main building is still there, while the other buildings are kind of like gutted out, but they still kept that Gothic design and then just built within it, you know, the apartments and the condominiums. But only parts of the original asylum, it still stands today. And of course, you know, the cemetery for the patients who died there, that's still there and it's maintained. But a lot of people talk about, and I can't confirm nor deny this because I've never been there, but I mean, we've all had experiences and stuff. But over the years, while the hospital was in operation, not I mean, now it's apartments, but at the time when it was in operation, people were even talking about paranormal ongoings. People talked about seeing shadow entities in these hospitals, you know. And then, of course, when it was shut down for like 13 years, you know, people were constantly trying to break into this place. And only a few people got to get in, you know, not too many could because it was very well guarded by police and everybody. But people were always talking about hearing disembodied cries coming from this place and wailings, you know, just that awful human sorrow that comes from this place. They would hear it in the hospital. They also would experience things down in the tunnels. You hear, you know, disembodied footsteps. People were seeing like full body apparitions. You get that feeling of like, you know, heaviness and dread or sadness type of energy, which I think a lot of people can still feel that when you go by these places anyway, even if they're still in operation. When they're still in operation, you can just feel that, you know. There was claims on the net that people who are now living in these apartments are experiencing things where they're sick because, I mean, it's still the same building. You're still going to have that residual energy, I'm sure, stuck there. But they're talking about how their lights are going on and off. Doors are opening and closing on their own. You know, they're seeing strange things. Things are moving. They talk about sometimes they'll see like a person in like a gown wandering in the hallway and then just disappear, you know. And people say, I can't say this is a fact or not, but people say that this was the hospital that was the birthplace of lobotomy. True or not, I don't know. But, you know, back in the day, those type of treatments, you know, those experimental procedures were really brutal. Because basically you're taking like a chisel or some type of tool like a chisel, and then you're tapping it into the person's front of their skull until, you know, the frontal lobe, and hoping like, oh, this will cure them, you know. But if the patient didn't die from it, they were left into like a zombie state for the rest of their life. I mean, that alone would cause some type of release into the environment, if not attracting things in or leaving an imprint or causing the person to permanently stay in the environment. I don't know. It's really hard to say.
I can't understand how they got the idea by digging into someone's brain was going to cure them.
Well, they figured if they cut something out or poke something here. I mean, that's medical stuff. I mean, that's just. Yeah. I mean, It was experimental. Well, I can't say why people came up with crazy things that they do, but you know, they're probably all sitting around one night drinking some whiskey and be like, "Let's try this." I don't know. You know, I can't say I wasn't the person, but to be honest, I mean, I'm not really surprised that this place has both residual and intelligent happenings going on, you know, and it attached to the land just because of just the little things that I mentioned tonight. There is like so much more that occurred with all of the brutality and the negativity and the emotions, the abandonment and everything else that was going on there. You know, it's just the tortured souls and the abuse. No wonder this place is like a hotbed for strange occurrences going on, you know?
Yeah, it seems...
a guy in chat, NJ Art, said, yes, this is the birthplace of the lobotomy. All right, thank you for confirming that for us.
I think it was about 5 years ago I was reading about this case that, where this guy up in Massachusetts was on trial for murder, and he was found incompetent to stand trial, so they sent him to Danvers. So I'm guessing that they still take patients.
No, it's not. This place is no longer in operation because it's now condominium or apartments and, you know, condos that you can purchase. It's no
Well,
longer.
it might be another place. It might be another place in Danvers. Maybe they built another place.
But oh, I'm sure. But at the well, what year was he sent? Because
it was just 5, 6, 7 years ago.
There must be another facility. Well, there are.
There has to be another
multiple facilities nearby. Yeah, for sure. But there were people who escaped from this, and they were like, I can't remember. Like one time, this guy escaped, and he was walking. Either he walked into the post office, or was walking by the post office, and the postmaster shot him. And I'm like, wow, that's kind of extreme. Because I was reading the newspaper article. Yeah, it didn't say why he shot him. I'm just like, did he know he was an inpatient? And he was like, oh, can't have this walking around, and shot him. What? I don't know. It was like one of the weirdest newspaper articles that I'd read. But I'm attaching the links. Because I hope you guys go read more, because this is such a crazy place and the things that happened, you know, and I can't believe the things that people can get away with. And it's not just back in the day, because it continued on all the way up into the 2000s. I was reading how one person left that hospital because they were in trouble for so much abuse and ended up going to another facility, I guess. Yeah. And got busted there. You know? It's just some people I think thrive off of being that way. Like they get off on abusing people, and what not a perfect place to go to a place where people can't defend themselves. It's like this, or you always hear it like in nursing homes too, you know? Yeah. Hopefully that person got more than just a year, you know?
I would hope so. It just seems to me that somebody that would abuse someone like that, you know, in that condition, that they should get more than a year. Well, excuse me, that's beating up on somebody that is basically helpless.
Right, and they're 52 years old too, and
yeah,
and you had two of them. I don't care if you don't have, you know, maybe you shouldn't be doing these jobs where you're supposed to be a caretaker, because if you have no patience, you shouldn't be working.
Then you shouldn't be working with people like that.
Well, not like that, but you shouldn't be working with people who need care. It doesn't matter if it's kids.
You should not be a caregiver of any kind. Exactly.
Even with pets, you should just go
get a job in wrestling or something. Don't take care of helpless people.
UFC fighting, yeah. I don't know. Anyway, that's about what I had on that. But I you know, I'm gonna post a link where it's got photos of actually where you can look at the whole inside of this place before it was changed. Also, it shows the new photos of it too. It's got tons of it shows the tunnel system too. It shows the maps of like everything, a lot of the original stuff. You get to go read reports of people that were written up, newspaper articles. There's just this awesome link that I hope you guys go check out, because there's just some good stuff in there. So, do you want to go ahead and do your next one?
Yeah. Okay. Mine is the Belchertown State School. Now, this was a place for children. You know, I mean, they put adults in state hospitals and they put children in state schools. But let's face it, an asylum is an asylum. This place is in Belchertown, Massachusetts, and it was established in March of 1922 as the Belchertown State School for the Feeble-Minded. And this was actually the third school of its kind in Massachusetts. This was like an 800-acre complex, and 200 acres of it were a working farm that had poultry and cattle and vegetable gardens, which made the place almost self-sufficient. Now, the local fire department, their dispatchers would use its switchboard, and the auditorium in this place was used for public events such as dances and also as a public movie theater. Now, the first year it was open, it housed 400 students. Now, while the place was supposed to be for children who were, and I hate using this word, okay, who were mentally retarded, their words, not mine, it received children with all kinds of learning disabilities and physical afflictions. Actually, it was basically a warehouse for those who were deemed unfit to function in normal society. And it wasn't much of a school either. Sure, there were classrooms, and in the beginning they had good intentions, but the thing of it was, not much of, if anything, in the way of education really took place there. I mean, in the beginning, they did have teachers. They had music teachers. They had art teachers, and things like that. When this place first opened, like I said, they did have good intentions. But unfortunately, as the years went on, that just kind of went out the window. And those, who were able, they worked on the farm along with farm staff. Now, like I said, in the beginning, I'm sure the place had good intentions and it was used for its intended purpose, but in the end, that's not what actually took place there, because patients suffered physical and sexual abuse. Some were kept in their beds all day with no entertainment at all, and they laid in their own urine and excrement. The patients who were up and about were not much better off. I mean, some wore diapers and they would soil themselves, and they were even lucky if they didn't have to wear the diaper for more than a day. Most patients who were dumped there ended up spending their entire lives in the place, because when the place was, when somebody finally reported this place, they had patients in there that were from the age of 1 all the way up to the age of 88. The patients who were severely mentally handicapped, their teeth were removed to make it easier to feed them, and to stop them from biting, because the ones that were really, really bad off, they would fight them when they tried to feed them.
Yeah, but you know what I think it is? I think a lot of times these people were acting out because of the condition, because they were being emotionally ignored and not cared for. So they were responding out the best that they knew how, or acting out, you know what I mean? And so
I think that they knew where they were and what was happening to them. I really do. I don't think that they were so, that all of them anyway, the majority of them were so bad off that they didn't know what was happening to them.
Yeah, and these were all kids in this place.
Yeah. But, like anything else, of course, eventually there was overcrowding, which meant that a lot of the patients slept on floors, and as always happens with overcrowding, there was filth. There was even a vermin infestation. The place was meant to hold like 500 patients, but by the time the conditions of the place were known to the public and to the parents of the patients, there were like over 1,500 patients in this place, and not enough staff to take care of them. The place was so crowded that what beds did exist were pushed together so close that the patients that were lucky enough to have a bed had to climb over other patients to get to their beds. In 1972, this man named Benjamin Rickey, and it's spelled Ricci, and this man happened to be a famous author. He went to this school to visit his son Robert, and he couldn't believe the conditions he saw. He said there were half-naked patients walking around covered in feces. The patients were filthy. There was lice and maggots crawling on these patients. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So he notified a local newspaper, and he filed a class action lawsuit.
It always makes me think of that Geraldo Rivera thing I saw on YouTube, where I don't know when he did this because I was like young or whatever, but I remember watching this documentary on YouTube where Geraldo Rivera went into one of these places and they were filming exactly what you were talking about.
Yeah. I mean, he said that this Ricky said that, he noticed maggots crawling in and out of these patients' ears and their hairs and on their skin and stuff, and that makes me shudder to even think of that. And but anyway, he filed this class action lawsuit, and of course, being famous for his time, this caused the Massachusetts District Court to assign a Judge Taros to the case, and this judge visited this school unannounced. Mm-hmm. He said in his report the deplorable conditions, and stated he saw patients leaning against a wall moaning. Some were banging their heads into the wall. He said the patients were sitting in their own waste. And like I said, some had maggots.
Not magnets.
Not magnets, maggots. And crawling in and out of their infected ears. And this is the short version of the report. And even after all of this, after that judge went in there and all of this, the place was still not closed down until 1992. And if one good thing did come out of all of this, it did change the way that Massachusetts dealt with the mentally handicapped, and it also caused new regulations and, rules and laws to go into effect. The judge said that he just going into this place and it smelled bad, and he said he just got physically sick just from seeing what he was seeing. Well, some of the patients weren't even dressed, and a lot of the ones that were really severely handicapped were just tied to their beds and left there.
Yeah, but a lot of these places took in people who were, like people were saying in chat, orphanages or abandoned or whatever. But
right.
I can see why places like this are haunted, or it even attracts negative entities to these places because of the things that the torture and the emotions are going on. And
the thing of it is, a lot of these people came from well-to-do families, and their families just dumped them in there. Didn't even go back and check on them. They just dumped them in there thinking that, their child is going to be taken care of and get some sort of education, and this is what they got. And some of the patients, it didn't say how many died, but there were some that did die. And the ones that their families didn't claim the bodies, there's supposed to be a small cemetery out behind this place.
Were these kids the ones that buried the ones who died too? Because that seems to happen a lot.
Say that again. I didn't quite
get that. Where the
patients
or the people who lived at these facilities were the ones who oftentimes dug the graves for the other people who passed away.
You know what? It really didn't say. I couldn't even find a number of how many of the patients died. It just said that there was a small cemetery out back for the patients that died, that they were not claimed. Now, as far as the hauntings go,
yeah. What'd they say happened at this place?
Well, they say that you hear the sounds of moaning. You see apparitions just walking around like they're in a daze.
Yeah.
You get the putrid smell of urine and feces, but I kind of wonder just how paranormal that is, because if it was that bad, that smell is going to be there for a long time, especially like urine in a wooden floor. When it soaks in, it's about the only way you can completely get rid of that is if you dig up, tear up the floor and put down a new one. The feeling of despair, screams. They say that doors that you prop open, they'll slam shut and they'll lock.
Oh, I'd hate to be locked in,
I know, me too.
Padded rooms or whatever they used to have.
Me too.
That would suck.
And they also say that doors will open and slam shut on their own. Crying, running footsteps. They say there are extreme temperature changes in there, and some have claimed that just walking by the place made them become physically ill. There were tunnels in there that connected, the buildings and stuff, and they said that the lights down there will flicker on and off, and there's no electricity in those tunnels.
That's interesting.
Like I said, doors open and shut on their own, and it just seems like there's paranormal activity of some kind in any part of that building, and they say that this activity takes place no matter what time of the day or night. That this is basically like a continuous thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's probably like, I guess as people term it, both residual and intelligent occurrences going on. But I can see why these places are I mean, I wouldn't just say it's, you know, the leftover energy that's going on, but I could also see when torturous things like this and extreme emotions that are going on, that it would be like a beacon for negative energies or entities to come here and feed off of this, you know?
Yeah. And it does. It does. Now, a lot of this place, you know, there are a few buildings that are still standing and stuff in this place, and I think that that it's still sitting empty. I don't think that anybody had bought it or whatever, and it is on the National Registry of Historic Places. But the thing that got me was this was a place for children. Mm-hmm. This wasn't adults going in there, although it's bad enough to beat up a helpless adult. This was a place for children, and not all the kids. Now, the kids that were not severely mentally handicapped really did not have a bad life in there.
What? How is that not bad if you have to look at other people around you?
They were in another building.
Okay. But still, you'd still be hearing their screams.
Well, you would think that you would, but there were some placed in there that were not severely handicapped, although they were, you know, mentally handicapped, and they could be taught. They were in another building, and this building was in better condition. You know, I mean, these people were taken care of. And I don't want to get political or anything, but there is a Massachusetts state senator that worked in that place in the bad part after he got out of the military. And no, it's not JFK. It's another senator from Massachusetts. It's well known now. But not the ones that were not severely mentally handicapped did not really have it bad in there. But like I said, they were separated from those that were worse off.
Yeah. So this building, some of these buildings are still there, so people could probably go there and do a little investigation themselves.
I checked to see if there were police patrolling the place and stuff, because, you know, usually in a thing like this, you know, I try to tell these urban explorers, you know, and these paranormal people while the place is being patrolled by police, but I didn't see anything about that. And while they're thinking of plans of what to do with this place, so far I cannot find where this place was being occupied at all right now.
Well, yeah, we never, like, tell people, like, go break into places or whatever, you know.
Right, exactly.
We're not influencing anyone, and we're just, you know, but this is just some places that we found interesting that if you could, you would probably go investigate, is what you're saying. But
if I could, I would probably go in there and investigate, but it's like I said, we are not encouraging anyone to break the law and to sneak into these places.
Yeah, don't drag us down with you. Why don't we take like a quick break? We're going to take like a quick 2-3 minute break. We're going to get a drink of water, and we'll be right back. Me and Spooky have a ton more places to talk about, you guys, so don't, you know, just go get a snack, get a soda, whatever, and we'll be back in like 2-3 minutes, and we'll continue on with tonight's topic. Welcome back to Anything But Ordinary with Spooky and Raven. Tonight's topic is Haunted Massachusetts. This is one of our many reoccurring theme topics we're trying to cover all the states. And again, like many of the ones we've done before, this state is going to be another one where we're going to end up doing a few times, not just about paranormal stuff, but it seems that, when we were doing our research, I know when I did, I was coming across how they were having a lot of sightings for UFO stuff, which I thought was kind of interesting.
Yeah, and cryptids.
Yeah.
And cryptids. I found that, I found a couple about that too, and I thought, nope, got to get away from that. That's not what it's about. It's about paranormal. Not cryptids.
Yeah. Well, I know we still have to start that show with the cryptid state soon too. We haven't haven't done that. Hopefully we're going to be coming back. Like we said, we're sorry. We just had both Spooky and I've had a lot going on in our life. Speak with all her stuff and me, and it kind of pulled us away. But we're hoping to get back into the swing of things, if maybe not every other week, but as much as we can for now until things settle down in both our lives. And
because I actually miss doing this. I missed it.
Yeah, I miss all the chatters because
we get great listeners, and we get really great people in that chat room.
Yeah, I love reading. I love reading what everybody's talking about and the things that their input and the humor, and it's always so nice and so positive. It's just like a nice place for all of us to come together. But I don't know. I definitely think I would probably go to the place that you were talking about. It sounds interesting, not because of like the horrific things that happened there, you know what I mean? But the activity that seems to be occurring in these places. I know you can, like the Danvers State place that's now apartments, you can, drive up there. That's like a parking lot for the apartment buildings, I'm sure you can
I don't know if I would live in that place though.
I would. I'd probably just like rent it for a couple of months, check it out, see if anything happens, and then move on, you know what I mean?
I don't even know if I could do that because when I walk into a place that's full of negative energy, I just feel like I'm choking. I can't stay there very long. And I could not live in an apartment building that I knew used to be a mental institution, especially one where a lot of abuse and stuff like that took place. I couldn't do it.
I know, people heard me giggle a little bit.
And it'd be my luck, my apartment would be the one where the morgue used to be.
I didn't even think about that. These places had those. You know what I mean?
Well, of course they did. All of these places had morgues. How do you know your apartment is not the one where the morgue was?
Well, because that'd be in the basement. So if your place ain't in the basement.
They all were, well, back then, they were in the basement. You're right.
But I think that the morgue would probably be like the safest place where the less negative things happen because it's not like they were, I don't know, because they were experimenting on people when they were alive, and they don't really have the type of...
You don't know what they did to them after they died.
We're not going there. We're not... There's one way of talking...
I'm talking about experiments and stuff.
Well, I'm just saying, there's one way of going dark, and then there's a way of going way too dark, but...
Well, that's true.
That's going a little too dark. And there's some things you just don't want to know, but sometimes you kind of needed to talk.
That's true.
But there's sometimes you need to talk about the things that happen in these places so that history does not repeat itself,
Right. Exactly.
I think people shouldn't be considered, that's the thing. We're so separated nowadays, you know what I mean? Where people aren't like, it's just like we're like throwaways. Oh, what happened to so-and-so? I don't know. And you're just tossed away. Same with the prison system, A lot of things need to change. But that's getting off the topic. It was bounce around, because we talk about everything and anything. That's the title. But one of the places that I picked for tonight is the Hoosac Tunnel, or also known as the Bloody Pit. Now, like, a lot of the ones I was picking tonight is because it's places like I would, kind of want to go check out myself. But this is located in North Adams. It's 4.75 mile long railroad tunnel that cuts through the Hoosac Mountains. And basically, this tunnel, it's still being used to this day. So you kind of have to be careful when you're out there. You don't get hit by a train or whatever. But the work on this tunnel started back in 1851, and it wasn't completed until 1873. So it basically took like 22 years for them to. You're going through a mountain, woman. You know.
Woman.
Insane. It's going to take a long time to chisel away and blast away, you know. But in the 22 years, you know, several people were killed and injured in the process. They said, I don't know if it was like 195, some people were saying, where other people saying it was like 200, you know, that who were killed during these years, recorded anyway. But in the first years, many, sorry, you're getting me laughing now, because me and her joke around all the time, and, you know, there's just certain things, the way she says something, it cracks me up. But in the first years, many of the guys were like, you know, how they go in and they drill the blasting holes into the rock by hand, and then they were using gunpowder, and which is extremely dangerous, you know. In March of 1853, I read they brought in this tunnel boring machine, and they used it thinking like, oh, awesome, we're going to just blaze through this, right? Well, they only made like 10 feet in, and then the thing malfunctioned and ended up being useless, and was stuck inside the rock.
And it took them 20 years to get it out?
No, but it took them a lot of years before they ended up moving that thing out. But the miners worked away basically with picks and shovels and just were cracking away at the rock. And it just took them a long time. But in the 1860s, that's when they started using nitroglycerin and compressed air drills. And in March of 1865, there's these three guys, Ned Brinkman, Billy Nash, and Ringo Kelly. I guess they were in planting a charge of nitro when Kelly kind of prematurely set off the charge, and it ended up burying the other two guys under a pile of boulders. And of course, they died. He ended up coming out alive, you know, injured or whatever. But when I was reading more on this, they said that Kelly ended up found dead on March 30th inside the tunnel, almost basically in the same area where he ended up killing the two guys accidentally or whatever, but he was strangled to death. There was another thing that I read that happened in October of 1867 where 13 men died in one of the worst accidents that this tunnel has ever had. Basically, you know how they have these vertical ventilation shafts to kind of, you know, as the further they go in, you have to go up to bring in fresh air or you're going to, you know, die. There's no oxygen or whatever. Well, I guess it was called like the central shaft or whatever, they were having these men work down in there, but on the top of that central shaft, there was like this structure, and inside that building, it kind of contained a lot of their tools, you know, the black powder, the nitro, and then also like the hoisting mechanism that would help bring the men down into the shaft to continue working, whatever. Well, while the 13 miners were lowered down, it was like 583 feet deep, I believe that's what they said. And a few other guys were kind of still working up above, near the building or within the building or whatever. And somehow, somebody was working with a gas lamp or whatever, and it created a spark, and it ended up getting into the building, and the whole thing just erupted into flames because, you got all that stuff in there, which I don't even know why you'd place.
The nitro. Yeah,
the nitro, the black powder, whatever. But why would you even keep all that in one space, especially over the central ventilation shaft, which doesn't make sense. You know what I mean? But anyway, this thing catches up in flames, and it's going, and the guys up above are trying to put the flames out, but the building, you know, just was engulfed, and it ended up collapsing, and the men down below who were working in the shaft ended up having all the rigging equipment come crashing down on them, the mining tools and everything, and, you know, the timber and stuff just came blazing down onto them, and they ended up being trapped down there. And for several days, you know, they were lowering workers down in there trying to see if there was any survivors. And this one guy, his name was Mallory, you know, he was lowered down the shaft a couple of times, and he said that, you know, he was just telling them to quickly pull him back up because before he even got all the way down there, he was almost died of like how do you say that word?
Asphyxiation.
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
Just due to like a lack of air down there, you know, and because when the building went up in flames, a lot of the structural beams came crashing down, and what they ended up doing is they took out the fresh pumps that would bring in the air, and it was also pumping out the water out of the tunnels too. And since none of that was working, the 13 men that were down there were kind of doomed, because one, they're not getting any air, and the tunnel was filling up with water. And according to this newspaper article that I was reading, which was in 1873, it said it took them over a year for them to end up recovering these guys from the flooded shaft. And it also said, and it was weird because when I was reading the articles and stuff, they said that they found makeshift rafts and stuff. So those guys were actually alive for a while, hoping to be saved. But, you know, they didn't end up recovering any of the bodies until over a year later. So that's just awful. Could you imagine being down there in that darkness and hoping and praying that someone, I don't even know. Anyway.
You know, the worst part is they probably ended up starving to death.
Well, he probably died from lack of air.
Well, that too.
But there was another article I was reading where it said another time where 6 men who were being lowered down by the hoist, the rope broke, and these guys just plummeted to their death. I mean, they just basically went blazing down and, you know, hit the rocks below, and they died instantly. You know, in 1907, there was this guy, his name was Siegel. He was working in the tunnel when he was killed by a train, and it ended up dragging his body over 90 feet. And I don't even know why they didn't tell these guys who were in there working, like, hey, a train's coming, you know what I mean? But
really,
during the years of men working on the tunnel, like I said, from the websites I was reading, they were saying it was about 200 people that were killed from falling rocks, explosions, fire, drowning from that flooded tunnel, you know, or random accidents. Some were even murdered, okay? And it's not just the men who died out there. I came across a newspaper article that was in 1884 where they found a woman dead lying next to the tracks near the tunnel. And they're like, well, we don't know how she died, but she had like a cut on the back of her head, you know? But people say it was because of all of these lives that were lost, that this tunnel in this area is haunted. Now, one of the articles I read was this guy. His name was Joseph Impaco or something. I don't know how to say his last name. I apologize. But anyway, he was working for the Boston and the Maine Railroad. And it said while he was working in the tunnel, he had experienced strange things going on, like paranormal, I guess you would call it. But one time he said while he was working in the tunnel alone, you know, chip away at the ice on the tracks, he said he heard a disembodied voice saying, Joe, Joe, jump quick. And that's when he looked up and he saw this express train coming, and he jumped, and the train, he said, just missed him by mere seconds. Now, several weeks later, he said there was another time that he was out there working on trying to free some of the stuck freight cars from the ice. And he was using like one of those iron pry bar things, you know. And he said he heard a voice again yelling at him saying, you know, Joe, drop it. And, you know, calling his name and stuff. So, of course, he dropped it, the bar, immediately. And he said not even seconds to moments later, the pry bar was struck with, you know, like 11,000 volts of like shorts, of electricity, because apparently one of the overhead power line circuits shorted, and it was going down the track, and it hit the pry bar, and the pry bar just went flying. And just, you know, I don't know if it's stuck in the wall, but it definitely whipped across and hit one of the, you know, the wall of the tunnel. And if this thing didn't holler for him, and if he didn't drop the bar when he did, he would have been, you know, basically fried to death, you know?
Wow.
And he said another time, he said while he was working outside the tunnel, this is in a newspaper article, which I'm going to have in the links tonight so you guys can read more detail of what he was talking in there. I'm sure the newspaper guy left a lot of the information out that he was saying, but one time when he was working outside the tunnel, he said he was almost struck by a falling oak. And after the tree fell, or the tree branch or whatever, he said he heard what he said was the most ominous, wicked laugh ever. And he was like, that's it, I'm out of here. You know, and not too long after, he said he basically quit his job and moved. And never been back.
No kidding.
Never went to work back there. But he said, like, I don't remember, there's like an anniversary date that comes up that he'll go back there just to pay respects, because he thinks that if he doesn't, these things are going to harm him. You know what I mean? But whatever, you know, was it one of the men who lost their lives while working in the tunnels for all those years, you know, saving him? And was there another man who thought it, you know, who died there, who thought it was funny that he almost got killed? I don't know. I just thought that was kind of interesting. But he's not the only one. There was this woman, her name was Dr. Mullendor or something like that. Now, she claimed, you know, because she was hearing all these reports and stories of people having all these encounters in the tunnel and whatnot. So she's like, I'm going to go investigate it. Like, you know how all you guys are who listen to the show and stuff, you know, you do your paranormal investigation. So she was curious too. So she goes out there, and she said that while she was in the tunnel, she too had an encounter. Well, when she was walking in the tunnel, she felt like this cold breeze, which I can see you have a breeze in the beginning of the entrance, but not when you're like miles in. You're not going to really feel too much wind. But she said after she felt that cold breeze, she saw this strange light. And as she approached the light, she said she saw an apparition of a man dressed in the 1800 style work clothes, and he was eating his lunch. And she said when she was sitting there staring at him, she decided like she was going to try to speak to him. And she said something, and she said he looked up at her for a few moments, and then he just vanished. Which I find it interesting, because that means he was interacting with her, you know?
Right. Now he noticed her.
Right, when she
and
spoke
actually
to him.
he responded to her, actually.
Yeah. Now, there were stories even as back as 1868 of people having paranormal things happening, because, you know, when the men were still working down there, because obviously people were dying and stuff. But there was this one guy, his name was Travers. He was like this cavalry officer. Because he was hearing, the men were complaining about hearing disembodied voices and lights and stuff and things, like freaking them out because a lot of men would quit because of them being harassed by spirits and things too. But so he's like, whatever, I don't believe you. I'll just go check it out myself. So he goes to check out the complaints and stuff of the strange happenings going on. And he himself said that he heard disembodied voices of men wailing in pain. And, like I said, the men who were working the tunnels at the time, they also talked about seeing apparitions of men carrying hand tools, and they would just disappear into thin air. And of course, they were hearing the disembodied cries and stuff. And there was this story from 1874 where a man was out hunting near the tunnel. And I can't say for a fact that all of this is true or none, or all of it's fact. We're just sharing what's out there that's being said. But
right.
There was a report, a story, and it was also in a newspaper article of this guy who was out hunting near the tunnel. His name was Frank. I guess he ended up disappearing for a few days, so people went out looking for him. But when they found him, he had said that he had heard strange sounds coming from the tunnel. And they were actually calling him in, like calling him, he was being drawn into the tunnel. And he said that he had saw spirits walking around, and that one of them actually grabbed his rifle and hit him with it. True or not, I don't know. But these are just claims that have been reported about this area. But there are people who have been living near the tunnel or been around the tunnel for years, not as even far back as then, but to recently, where people talked about seeing shadow beings or hearing cries of people in pain. And of course, there are people who go to investigate the tunnels, and they have said to have seen a white apparition inside the tunnel. Some have talked about seeing orbs of light. Because when you go in the tunnel, after you're away from the entrance, it's pitch black. There's no light coming in. You know, you're basically under a mountain, you know.
Yeah.
People are talking about being touched or slapped. They heard, you know, of course, the voices and laughs, and you don't know where it's coming from. But tonight, like I said, you know, I'm going to be posting in the show reference this links to where you guys can go read far more on the creation of this tunnel and its history, which there's a lot more to this, and there's a lot of things that happen, and it's quite fascinating. But you can also, there's a link where I found where somebody put like great detail on where you can actually go read about all the different men that were documented that lost their lives, the newspaper articles on it, explain how they lost their lives, when they lost their lives, all that type of stuff. And there's this one site that has like tons of like the newspaper articles and the history, the drawings and photographs of the things that used to be around the tunnel while they were working and all that stuff. But I kind of tend to believe people are experiencing something out here. And I don't, maybe some of it's residual, some of it's intelligent. I mean, I can't say, but
it sounds like they have a little bit of both in there.
Right.
You know, and I believe it sounds like, I mean, there's just too much there. It sounds like that that people are experiencing something in this tunnel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. And it's been happening for years. Just because, I mean, a lot of people lost their lives, and some of it in an awful way. I mean, I couldn't imagine plummeting to my death. Or, you know, being trapped in a tunnel, hoping that you're going to be saved, and who knows how long you were holding on for days, who knows, hours, whatever, praying that you're going to be spared, and you're in nothing but darkness, you know? Ugh.
Wow.
But, I mean, this is someplace I'd want to check out.
Those are some terrifying experiences there.
And thoughts. Right. To even, I mean, people say they feel kind of like what occurred there. Some people who go there are really affected. But there are trains that still kind of go through there. I saw a video on YouTube where the guys were on the back of the train, and they were actually filming the whole ride through, and then they had like night vision cam. So you can kind of watch this. I'm going to put it in the links for you guys to check out. But while you're watching I didn't watch the whole entire thing because it's like 5 miles long, so it's kind of a long video because I had to keep doing other research for the place too. But when I was kind of watching it, it was weird because it kind of looked like at some points that you could see a person standing on the side of the tunnel through the guy's IR cam, and they didn't always see because they were talking to each other while it was going on, explaining to about what part they were at or whatever. But at some points in that video, it looks like you can see a person standing on the side, but not like a real body. You know what I'm trying to say? So
right.
I'm definitely gonna put that link into here for you guys to check out because I think you should watch it. I thought it was kind of interesting. You know, and of course you're not going to be able to hear any EVPs because the train's clacking away.
Yeah.
But this is definitely a place that I would probably go check out for sure if I had the money. Maybe if we all win the Mega Millions, we can all go.
There you go.
Paranormal investigating together. Everybody, all of us in chat can go together, right? So.
There you go. Because we can afford to take them.
Well, yeah. One person doesn't need $1.6 billion on their own. You know what I mean? So.
You never know.
That's a lot of money to spend. I mean, I'm not that greedy.
I know. Who needs that much money?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you want to go and do your next one?
Yeah.
Cool.
Fort Warren. I'll get it out here in a minute. This is a fort that was constructed of stone and granite, and it's in a pentagonal shape, and it's located on George's Island, which is one of the islands near the entrance to the Boston Harbor. In fact, it was constructed to protect the harbor. Now, construction began in 1833 and was finished just after the beginning of the Civil War in 1861. Now, it defended the Boston Harbor from the Civil War right up to the end of World War II. So this place was in business for a long time. We're talking about the Civil War, the Spanish-American War, World War I. I will get these words out. For some reason, I can't seem to talk. And World War II.
Well, we haven't done a live show for a long time.
I know.
It's one way just to talk normal to people, but it's another talking, knowing like other people are listening to you live.
Yeah, I know, because I'm not used to people listening to me at all. The fort contained a barracks, ammunition magazine, storehouses, a hospital, a kitchen, a mess hall, jail cells, and a battery of heavy guns facing the sea. And it was named for Dr. Joseph Warren, who was a Revolutionary War hero who later died at the Battle of Bunker Hill. And Dr. Warren was the person who sent Paul Revere on his famous ride. Now, during the Civil War, it served as a prison for Confederate officers and government officials from Maryland, and actually anybody who seemed to be anti-government, anti-Northern government. Actually, the most famous detainee was Alexander Hamilton Stevens, who was the vice president of the Confederate States of America. Now, even though the place had a reputation for its humane treatments of its prisoners, 13 Confederate prisoners did die there. And the island itself was a very inhospitable place. I mean, it sits right out in the open with no protection from Mother Nature. These Confederate soldiers there, they found the winters to be intolerable, compared to their homes in the South. Now, there were several escape attempts, but none of them were really successful. And in one attempt, 2 soldiers were swept out to sea as they attempted to swim from the island. Now, this fort was permanently decommissioned in 1947, and it was sold in 1958. And after this big restoration project, it was opened to the public. And this place actually remains a favorite tourist destination. Now, the hauntings there are reports of hearing gunfire, screaming, moaning, apparitions of both Union and Confederate soldiers, disembodied voices, but the most famous haunting is this woman in black robes. And the story is that a Mrs. Lanier, who was the wife of Confederate Lieutenant Andrew Lanier, received this letter from her husband and, stating that he had been captured and he was a prisoner at Fort Warren. Now, she was determined to go free him. So she left Georgia and made it to the home of a Southern sympathizer in Hull, Massachusetts. Now, excuse me. This woman methodically watched the fort. And she had this looking glass, I don't think they called them binoculars then, a spyglass, I think is what they probably called them. And every night, or even during the day, she would go out and she would walk around just looking at different sections of this fort, what she could see. Mm-hmm. So finally, on this one stormy night in January of 1862, she cut her hair and she dressed like a man and she rode to the island. And she carried an old pistol and a pickaxe with her. Well, she made it to the island and she managed to find the dungeon where the prisoners were kept. Mm-hmm. She whistled this really obscure Southern tune, and her husband answered back. So she found, which cell he was in, and she was able to squeeze through the small window of his cell, and she was hidden there by the other Confederate soldiers in there.
Right.
Now, they had this plan. They were going to dig a tunnel with the pickaxe, overtake the guards, and obtain weapons.
You think somebody would hear you chipping away at the rock, though?
Well, you would, because it took several weeks to do this tunnel. And the thing of it was, just before the tunnel was finished, there was this real heavy blow of the axe that alerted this guard, and he sounded the alarm, and of course the tunnel was discovered. Mm-hmm. So when the guards were coming, of course the men had to make this real quick plan. So what they would do is that they would kind of surround the guard, and Mrs. Lanier was supposed to jump out of the tunnel, and overtake the guard. Well, she did, but the guard was able to slap the pistol from her hand, and when the pistol was slapped from her hand, it went off, and a bullet struck her husband, killing him.
Oh.
And, of course, she was captured.
Well, that sucks.
Yeah, that really sucks. So as punishment, of course, she was tried, and as punishment, she was condemned to death by hanging. And her final request was that she be hanged in women's clothing.
Right.
Well, they searched the fort, and they couldn't really find any women's clothing, but they found these old black robes. So Mrs. Lanier put the robes on, and she was hanged. And she's buried on George's Island. And her apparition, they say, is the one most likely seen walking the beaches around the island. Mm. But people, even the tourists, and even the people that work there now, the tour guides, and I find it kind of strange because really this place treated its prisoners humanely.
Unlike some other ones that we've talked about on previous
unlike
shows.
A lot of them that we have talked about.
Yeah,
oh, my
where
goodness.
They practically starved them to death.
And the only real tragedies that happened here, besides the fact that, prisoners tried to escape and were recaptured. Matter of fact, 2 prisoners actually made it all the way to Connecticut before they were captured. But the only real tragedy here, besides the 2 that were swept out to sea, they tried to swim from the island during when the tide was going out. And, of course, trying to swim against the tide just grabbed hold of them and drug them out, was Mrs. Lanier being hanged there. Because I couldn't find anything else about anybody actually dying from their treatment there.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's interesting that people are continuing seeing a woman who they think is possibly her,
And her apparition, this woman that walked the beaches, didn't even appear until after she was hanged. And Union soldiers who would be on guard duty would even report seeing this apparition out just walking along the beaches. Said that there was a dark figure in black robes walking out there. And it even got to the point to where they were seeing this so much that the commander of the post issued an order saying whoever encountered this apparition, we're not to let it go by without questioning it.
How are you going to make it?
I don't know. I have no idea. I found that really kind of hilarious. I mean, how are you going to detain a ghost? How are you going to do it?
A thought popped in my head, and me and you always say we're not experts, but these are things that people talk about. But you know how people say that apparitions or spirits can't cross water?
Yeah.
And if she was the only person that died there, and they're constantly seeing her spirit,
she's the only one that actually. She's the only one that I found that actually died on the island.
Right, but you see what I'm trying to say? You know how people say, like, in apparition?
Well, no, her husband did. Her husband died there, too. And he was originally buried on the island. And this is what I couldn't figure out. He was buried on the island, and then his body was dug up and transferred to another fort and buried there. And eventually, his body was dug up and sent back to Georgia, where he was from. So he was dug up and buried, 3 times? But Lieutenant Lanier and his wife are the only 2 people that I could find that actually did die on this island.
Right. But what I was saying is, how there's people who talk about, and we're not experts, we're not saying, like, this is fact or not, but I'm just curious, like, since this is an island and well, of course, his body left and her body was still there, you think that maybe she couldn't leave the island because of the water, because people say, like, when you're...
I kind of wonder. That's a good point. I kind of wonder about that because I have heard, and I don't believe this, okay?
I don't know.
I really don't believe
for fact. We just hear stuff.
Because I was chased across a bridge one time. Not a big one, but there was still water. It still went over water by
something.
An apparition that wasn't very friendly. But but I've heard that too, that ghosts cannot cross water. I just don't believe that. Maybe it's a lot of water. Maybe it was more than what was in that little creek that I crossed.
Oh, my dad had encounters with stuff where, you know, we should almost save this for another show, but I'll just say it anyway right now. But because we're talking about water, but where the state that he was growing up in, this small town, there was this farm that had tons of activity that everybody knew. There was that everybody was seeing this apparitions and stuff, and it would, anybody who moved there would mess with their animals, where horses would be fleeing and run into the barn and break their neck trying to get away from this thing. And it went as far as Chicago, these stories went, that where these scientists came out to, like, yeah, right, let's investigate it. So they brought all this equipment and stuff that they kind of had back in the 50s and 40s or whatever it was. And, you know, they went out, and there was, of course, a water there or whatever. So when, you know, and all the kids, you know, when they were younger, they would, like, dare each other to go out there and who could stay the longest before crossing the river. Because this thing wouldn't cross the water, would always stop right before, right? And,
Yeah.
You know, when they would go out there, this thing would mess with people's vehicles. It would, you know, make them stop working and everything else. And these scientists who went out there, and the thing is, when you would see this apparition, you know how Ghostbusters is, the original one? They had that Slimer color, that glowing green color.
Yeah.
That's what this thing was, always emitting that type of light and stuff. And everybody who went out there would encounter this. Maybe it's still going on to this day, I have no idea, but I think the building's tore down. But even if the building's tore down, doesn't mean the things leave. But these scientists come out there and they're like, whatever, and they're setting up all their stuff. And of course, this thing starts harassing them, and they're freaking out, and they're trying to leave, and they couldn't get their vehicle to start. So my dad said that these people just left all their stuff and just went running across the bridge, and this thing was chasing them, you know. And then right when it got to the bridge, it stopped. But, you know, that wasn't the only place in that small town that was haunted. It seemed like the whole town was, but I'll save that for when we do that state or whatever. But I was just sharing this because it popped in my head when we were talking about water. But it does make me wonder why there is so many stories. And maybe it's not so much that they can't cross it, but maybe it was the person's spirit who, while they were alive, maybe that was their belief system of what they grew up on back in the day, when, because you know how the Irish and all them had their different beliefs, so maybe they believe it so much that they can't cross, or maybe they really can't cross. I don't know.
I don't know either, but I have heard it. I really don't know, but I really don't believe it, because there are covered bridges that have ghosts in them. Matter of fact, one's in Massachusetts. I didn't do that tonight. I almost did. But there are covered bridges, you know, that have ghosts, and those covered bridges cross water.
Mm-hmm. No, it's just curious. So maybe,
I mean, does it have to be a certain amount of water, or what?
Or special water, or maybe it's just the person's belief system before they died, and therefore they think they can't leave the area or whatever. But anyway, that's just something that kind of popped in my head when we were talking about, you know, this lady.
It's a good point. It's a very good point.
A good thought, anyway. I'm going to go ahead and we should still have a couple more before we end, so I don't want to keep people too long. But I picked this one. It's called the Boston Light.
You cut out there for a second.
Well, hopefully you can still hear me.
Yeah, I can.
Okay. Please stay working. We still have a few to do. But it's the Boston Light. It's located on an island called the Little Brewster. And it's in the outer Boston Harbor. It's about 9 miles out of Boston. And in 1715, the colony of Massachusetts, basically, they paid like 2,400 British pounds to have this lighthouse, you know, constructed. In 1716 in September. And the Boston Lighthouse, which stood roughly about 60 feet tall, the first structure was kind of built with just wood, but it was lit by, candlelit power. It had a keeper's house. No, wait, not this one. The other place I was thinking of. This one was not built of wood. Sorry, getting confused. I was reading so many things for research for tonight. I'm starting mixing places up. I apologize. Anyway, this place was 60 feet tall. It was lit by candlelit power at first. It had a keeper's house, a barn, and a wharf. And 43-year-old George Worthylake was the first man to take post. Now, both he and his wife and 2 of his daughters, because I think he had like 5 kids total, but the other ones were grown up and moved on. But him, his wife, his 2 daughters lived on the island along with their slave named Shadwell, another person named Dina, and then they had another guy who wasn't a slave. He was just a servant. There's a difference, I guess. His name was George Cutler. They all lived and worked and operated on the island or whatever. Now, George, the lighthouse keeper, he was also a harbor pilot at that time, and they raised sheep and stuff on the island. And in 1717, this huge storm came, and it basically took his whole flock away or whatever. And in November of 1718, George and his family, along with a family friend, John Edge, they were coming back from Boston. They were heading back out to the lighthouse. And it was said that they had boarded this sloop. I don't even know what that is. Like some type of small boat or whatever. Yeah. And they were heading out to the lighthouse. And they ended up anchoring that boat near the island. And one of their slaves, Shadwell, he came and took the canoe out to go pick them up from that boat. And when he was bringing them back to the island, it was said that George, his wife, one of his daughters, Ruth, and 2 of the other men had drowned when the boat capsized. And his other daughter, Anne, she and her friend were watching from ashore when this all took place. So she was the only one that living, and she watched her mom, her dad, and her sister die. But this is just one of many tragedies that happened to take place here. There was a guy named Robert Saunders. He was a sloop captain. I don't even know if I'm saying the name of that boat right.
Yeah, that's right, a sloop.
Okay, and anyway, he was asked to, hey, can you maintain the lighthouse temporarily until we can find a new lighthouse keeper, to take over? And he's like, yeah, sure. So he was there for a few days or weeks or whatever. And it was said that Robert and another man ended up drowning when their boat capsized while they were heading out to the island. It's kind of a dangerous spot, I guess. But in 1718, there was a guy named John Hayes. He took over operation of the lighthouse. And he stayed there for 16 years. And he actually had a large foghorn cannon installed. And then he asked them to build a gallery to go around the lantern tower room, so you could clean the windows better and stuff like that. And in 1720, I guess this fire broke out because this oil lamp fell and, set the wooden benches on fire. And his wife, of course, woke him up to inform him of this fire. And I guess the fire grew too large and they couldn't put it out. And only a few things could be saved. So the thing was basically, damaged. Now, many believed it was due to Hayes's negligence. That's why the fire occurred. But there's this guy, his name was Robert Ball. He ended up taking over the lighthouse keeper position in 1734. And both him and a man named Sampson, which was a slave, he lived and worked on the island with them. And again, in 1751, somehow there was another huge fire that took place, which, it's kind of going to happen when you're burning with oils and lamps with a light constantly. Right. It's going to happen, But according to the MPS site, they had mentioned that the tower experiences a few fires, some caused by the light, other was caused by lightning, which I would hate to be hit by lightning. Well, I'd hate to be killed in a fire too. What am I saying? But Yeah,
really. That's a bad way to go.
It still sucks. But the building was damaged, not just by the fires, but it was also damaged by huge storms. And the tower was constantly being rebuilt or repaired several times over the years. And in 1762, of course, Sampson died and he was buried on, a different island, whatever. But, of course, then people know about this. In 1170, 74 or whatever, 1774, excuse me, the British took over the island, you know, because of what was going on then, remember? And in 1775, the American troops are like, oh, you know, we're just going to sneak on here. So they snuck on the island and they set the whole place on fire. And then, you know, of course, they fled the island. But while they were fleeing the island, because of the tides, they ended up not, you know, they kind of being screwed. And then they got into like a little skirmish with the British there. So, of course, people are injured and hurt. So this telling more things that kind of occurred there, why it might be active, you know what I mean? But when the British soldiers came back later on, they were trying to repair the lighthouse after, you know, the Americans kind of trashed it the first time. 300 more American soldiers snuck back on the land of the island and set the place ablaze again, you know, and left. So, I mean, there's a lot of skirmishes happening here.
You would think after everything that happened to this lighthouse, they'd give up on it.
Well, you can't. You need a lighthouse for all the ships and boats and everything else. But reportedly, Robert Bell, who operated that lighthouse for 40 years, they said that he possibly like sailed off with the British in 1776 because nobody ever saw him again. So they think he just like took beat feet and left with them. But or he could have died. They just don't really know what kind of happened. But in 1783, this new lighthouse was commissioned to be built. And now this one was like a 75-foot tall structure. And it was built in, and finally finished construction in like 1790. And the Boston Light ended up being ceded over to the federal government. And there was this guy named Jonathan Bruce who operated the lighthouse in 1811 for a while, whatever. And he was talking about having weird paranormal experiences while he was working there, which I found was kind of interesting that it was even occurring way back then.
Yeah.
There's so much more history to what I'm saying, but I'm kind of just trying to compress it in real quick. But in 1856, the tower's height was extended to 98 feet. Now you have the 1.5-story frame dwelling that was built in 1885 for the head keeper, while there was like, now a new little double shack or whatever for the people, like his assistants or whatever too. And they had a brick oil house that was added on, and whatever. There was like a whole bunch of bunch of guys that were coming in and going, and people were being injured or whatever. And then we get up to like 1926 or whatever. That's when the Coast Guard, was it 1926 or whatever? Yeah, something like that. That's when the Coast Guard started coming in, taking over. And then like in 1948, the lighthouse was finally electrified, so it had become automated in like 1989. But the Coast Guard kept coming out there, because you had to keep up.
You're cutting.
Hopefully we don't lose the show, but I can't do anything about it. It's just the internet or whatever, you know what I mean?
Right.
But
just thought I'd let you know.
Well, thank you, but hopefully it stays. I can't do anything about it. But anyway, the Coast Guard, they still was performing duties here even though the lighthouse is automated now. But in 1964, the lighthouse was put on the National Historic Landmark, and the island became a part of the National Park Service in 1996. Now, in 2003, the Coast Guard was appointed. Her name was Sally Snowman. Now, she has been operating this lighthouse as the keeper ever since. And, like I said, of course, there's just like tons of people who have worked and operated there as the keepers and the helpers during the years. And, I only kind of mentioned a few, but I'll post like a link where you guys can go read about all this history, because there's like tons of history when it comes to this place. And, it's got a link to, you could read each and every person who worked there. But, with all the boats that had been capsized in the area and people who have drowned and the little war skirmish and people who got killed because of the weather on there and everything else, that's why people think that this place is haunted. Because some people think that George, as well as a few of the other men who had served their time as the keepers there, are still residing there. Because there's Coast Guard people who talk about seeing an apparition of a man dressed in like older attire in the lantern room. They also see a woman in white looking gown type of thing that she's also seen there as well, which they think it's probably him and his wife, because remember they drowned and got capsized or whatever. But by the time somebody gets to the lantern room, these people will disappear because it looks like them. You can kind of see their clothing and everything. So you're like, who's up here? They're not supposed to be on the island or whatever. And by the time somebody gets to the room, they're gone. The guys who were working there, they talk about, as well as visitors, they all talk about hearing, disembodied voices and laughter or little girls crying. At one time in 1947, there was this guy, his name was Anderson, him and his wife, they operated the lighthouse at the time, and they talked about, his wife specifically talked about one day while she was walking the shore, she said she heard disembodied footsteps, and it sounded like of a young person, she said it was walking really closely behind her, but every time she turned around, there was no one there. She also talked about hearing disembodied cries of a young girl or laughter happening in multiple areas of the island. They talked about how the fog signal engines would just start up on their own, as well as the light starting up on its own. And wow. They talk about seeing a man's figure all the time up in the lantern room on different occasions. And in the 80s, there was another Coast Guard talked about how the radio would turn on by itself. It says we're still streaming, so hopefully if...
I refreshed and it stopped.
Well, it says we're still streaming.
Yeah.
I'm just going to keep going, and hopefully it'll connect. But if anything, the podcast will still be there for people to check out, all right?
Right.
But anyway, I picked another lighthouse to kind of go with this because this place is haunted too. But you can text in chat, Spooky, and see if people are there. Millie says she hears us. The Minot Ledge is a second place that I was going to do. It's located up... I know you guys heard the first one. I don't know what's going on with the internet. Kind of broke up. But you can always go back after tonight's end, and hopefully you can hear it all. I don't know what's going on. Internet. It's showing that I got full bars or whatever, but I guess maybe YouTube's just doing some glitchy stuff or whatever. But the next one I'm going to do is called the Minot Ledge. It's kind of going with this because it seems like a lot of lighthouses out in Massachusetts are extremely active or whatever, but this one's located off of Cohasset Harbor. It's very active as well. It's said to be one of the most dangerous lighthouses in the United States, and it's had many tragic events take place there as well. Many ships have capsized, people have drowned in that area. The first lighthouse was constructed in 1850, but this structure could not withstand the conditions of the many storms and stuff. And in 1851, 2 out of 3 of the men who operated the lighthouse were killed. Because the first guy, his name was John Bennett, he was the lighthouse keeper. He basically left the lighthouse to go do something on shore. And the other guys behind were like Joseph Wilson and Joseph Antonio or whatever. They remained behind to maintain operate the light. Well, this large storm came in that day / evening, and it just beat down on the lighthouse. And people said that they could hear the fog bell continuously going up until about 10 p.m. when everything went dark. And the next day after the storm, they found the bodies of these guys on the beaches, like 2 separate areas far away. And only a few of the pilings were left standing of this first lighthouse. Well, in 1855, a new lighthouse was built out of granite with like iron pins, and it was finished constructed in 1860s, and it began operating on November 15th. And this guy named Joshua Wheeler and his 2 assistants operated that lighthouse, but said that they only worked out there for not even a year due to its dangerous conditions. And not just that, but the conditions and the isolation, it was said that it caused many of the keepers to just go crazy, or they just quit their job.
I'm looking at the picture.
Yeah.
Did the keepers live in the lighthouse?
Yeah. Yeah, they lived in that place. This is like, it's crazy.
I know.
How far that thing would shake and rattle.
I don't think I could do it.
Imagine the first one was built out of wood and on stilts.
Wow.
And that thing can withstand nothing. So then they built this one out of granite and pins or whatever, right? But it was such dangerous conditions and so isolating. Nobody could come out there because of the waves and everything else. So you're out there on your own, right? But there's a lot of people who quit right away. They didn't even last a year. One said this guy killed himself by slashing his own throat open.
My gosh.
Another guy went...
You couldn't even get a boat up to that.
Well, no, that's the thing. It's very isolating. Another guy went straight up crazy, so they took him out of that place in a straitjacket. There's other people who went out there and brought a cat, kind of helped, we can't bring a dog, so where's the dog going to go out to? But a guy brought a cat or whatever to help, so he wasn't out there all the time or whatever. But it's just crazy, the things that were going on there and the people who died there. But people said that due to the 40 plus people, there was 40 some people that kind of drowned there due to their ship sinking, the 2 men that were killed in the storm, and there's other people who died, the guy who slashed his throat there. They said that this lighthouse is very active, and people talk about seeing an apparition of a man in the lantern room there, and because people have to still go out there to check everything, make sure everything's up, because it's automatic.
Yeah, Cassandra's got a good question. How the hell did they build it there?
Well, I kind of shortened it, but I will have it in the links tonight that explain how they built out there, and they only had so much time every time when the tide was out to get as far as up that they could every time. You know what I mean? It was like a race against time when it comes with the tide when they were building these things. But just building it was a pain in the butt, and people got injured and hurt and everything else. You know what I mean? Yeah. But people talk about hearing disembodied knocks and voices. They'll hear a bell ringing in the middle of the night. They'll see a spirit of a guy or 2 men sometimes standing in the doorway of the lighthouse. Or sometimes they see a man hanging on the side of the lighthouse on a ladder holding a light, screaming out to everybody in a foreign language. I mean, true or not, I can't say for sure because we've never been there.
Rusty Reporter's got a very good point. They probably went out there during low tide.
I just said that. I said during the tide, when the tide was down, that's when they were building. They only had so much time before the tide would come back in. But, people talk about seeing a spirit of a guy screaming in there, out and stuff. I mean, that'd be frightening to say, especially during huge waves and stuff. I mean, but we can't say for not or whatever. But I just found that these 2 lighthouses were really interesting because I myself, we talked about this before back in so many years ago, how I found lighthouses interesting. I actually looked up on the internet, like, could you go stay in a lighthouse? Can I volunteer to work at a lighthouse? Yeah. And there are different places where you can go volunteer your time and live and work at a lighthouse.
Well, there are places where you can buy lighthouses. I went on a site one time. I typed in lighthouses for sale in the United States, and there was like 2 pages full of lighthouses for sale. Of course, some of them didn't look livable, but
those places that you end up those places you end up buying, you have to follow the National History registry thing. So you have to have painted, you have to maintain it all a certain way and everything. So then it could be
exactly.
But here the thing is, I always find it kind of interesting, and I think it'd be kind of cool to go. Maybe not so much this one, but it'd be cool to go to a lighthouse and check it out, just because there are so many.
You couldn't even get away from that one. If there was a spirit in there that scared the heck out of you, you couldn't even get away from it. There's no way you could just leave that place.
No. There was that one, remember when we very first started 100 billion years ago, it seems like, but it was probably like 4 or 5. When we first started, we did that, what was that, Flanagan Lighthouse or whatever? Remember all those lightkeepers just vanished and nobody knew what happened to them, whatever? That was a good one too. But yeah, I just thought these were worth talking about, but they're not the only lighthouses that seem to have a lot of activity, but both of them have a lot of history kind of towards it, especially the first one with the British scrimmage and, all that stuff. There's no wonder these places have activity. You know what I mean?
I know, but you know what? I couldn't. The first time those waves hit, that would be it for me. You wouldn't
even get on a boat to go out there. You don't even know how to swim. So I mean,
well, that's true. I have a thing about water. You're right.
Yeah.
They'd be hard pressed to even get me out there.
Well, no, you'll never be a lighthouse keeper. Okay. Do you want to go ahead and do your last one for the evening?
Yeah. First, I want to apologize for us running over time, but I also want to thank everybody for sticking with us. Parker House Hotel, 60 School Street in Boston. This is another one with a very extensive history. It's now known as the Omni Parker House, and it was originally built by Harvey D. Parker in Boston in 1854. And it opened on October 8th, 1855, and expansion began the very next year in 1866 until 1925 with new rooms and floors added. And today this place has 500 plus rooms. Big place. Now, it's also alleged to be the longest operating hotel in the country. And it was the first hotel in the country to introduce the European plan of operation. Now, what that is usually back then when you stayed in a hotel, your meals were included, but you could only eat at certain times. Well, on the European plan, you could eat, order meals anytime you wanted, and the meals were separate. They were charged to the room. Now, Harvey Parker ran the hotel until his death in 1884, and having no living children, because his children died before him, it was passed to his partners. Now, over the years, the hotel has had several owners, and today it's owned by the Omni Corporation. Now, this place is another one, like I said, with a long history, and we are going to post links for those of you who want to read about it, because it is just not possible for me to go into details. The Boston cream pie was invented here, and it became so popular, it's now the official dessert of Massachusetts. The Parker House roll was also invented here, and the word scrod, S-C-R-O-D, was coined here. Now, a lot of people think that scrod is a fish, but in fact, it is a word in reference to the freshest and the finest and the youngest whitefish of the day on the menu. A lot of politicians gathered at the Parker House. JFK announced his run for president here. In the dining room at table 40, he proposed to Jackie. Charles Dickens stayed for several months, in 1867 to 1868, and it was the first place where he introduced his new book, A Christmas Carol. Now, Mark Twain had been a guest here several times, and every president since Ulysses S. Grant, with the exception of Barack Obama, has stayed here. Ho Chi Minh, the Vietnam communist leader, claimed to have worked there as a pastry chef, but there's really no proof of that. And Malcolm X worked there as a bellboy. John Wilkes Booth, who owned undeveloped land in the area, stayed there every time he was in Boston. And in fact, he stayed there 10 days before he assassinated Abraham Lincoln.
Or as people would say, if he was really the one who did it. The conspiracy people.
There you go. He was even seen shooting his pistol at a local firing range. Judy Garland, Mary Todd Lincoln stayed there after her husband was assassinated. The Grateful Dead. Numerous celebrities and people have stayed there over the years, and it's really difficult to know whose spirits are haunting the place. Now, this place is a plethora of paranormal activity. There is a man who haunts the 9th and 10th floors, and he's dressed in Victorian clothing, and guests have said that this spirit appears and in their rooms and asks them, how they're doing and stuff. And one woman claimed the man appeared at the foot of her bed and asked her if she was comfortable and needed anything, then disappeared. That would freak me out.
I'm surprised because it doesn't take much. I mean, you're pretty hardcore when you go on your paranormal stuff, so you've seen some weird stuff. It really takes a lot to freak me out, and there's really not a whole lot I'm afraid of, but that would startle me at the least. Yeah. I'd hate to be like the ones I hate is like when you go do the hotel ones.
Yeah, because I'm the type when I see one, I go toward it, not away from it, unless I get the feeling that it's evil. But it's believed that this is the ghost of Harvey Parker, still looking over his guest and everything, because this place was the lap of luxury. Mm-hmm. In room 303, there is a ghost, and they say it's the ghost of a traveling liquor salesman He killed himself in the room, and when guests started complaining that the room always smelled like whiskey,
Yeah.
the water in the bathroom would turn on and off by itself. There were strange shadows seen darting across the room, that the management, instead of going through an exorcism, they just turned the room into a storage closet.
That's one of the rooms you don't want to be in, because that'd be the one where you're, like, sleeping and you wake up and the guy's face is, like, right up in yours. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know.
Or you're taking a shower and you come out and you'd be like, oh, yeah. You know what I mean?
Yeah, really. It's also said that this room was the inspiration for Stephen King's story, 1408, and the movie. That's that movie with John Cusack where he goes and stays in haunted hotels.
Yeah.
Because he's a skeptic.
Yeah.
And when he gets to this particular room, 1408, that's when things really go bad for him.
Yeah.
And by the way, Stephen King has also stayed in the hotel, and he has stayed in room 303. It's believed that the ghost of Charles Dickens walks around the hotel, and this is really not surprising because Charles Dickens loved this place, and he stayed there before he became a celebrity. And the mirror that he used to practice in front of is mounted in one of the hallways. Now, a few years back, a workman was cleaning this mirror when he saw this condensation on the glass, like someone just walked up and breathed on it, you know, like you do a window when you were a kid.
I still do.
I still do it, you know, just
for the hell
breathe
of it.
On it and then draw your little funny face. Yeah. A little happy face. But he was cleaning this mirror, and like I said, he saw condensation on it, so he wiped it clean. And then he heard this breathing as if someone was standing next to him. But when he turned his head to look, he was alone in the hallway. And when he turned back around to the mirror, there was condensation on the mirror again. So he walked away. He gave up and walked away. And after that, he refused to ever clean that mirror again. Employees have claimed to see apparitions of people in period clothing. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I mean, different periods of clothing.
Right, because this place has had so many people of all...
It's had so many people. I mean, literally thousands of people have gone through this place. And really, hundreds and thousands of celebrities have gone, and politicians have gone to this place. Because the place sits right down from the local government.
Yeah.
You know.
That's one place I wouldn't want to haunt. It's one place I don't even want to go by, the local government.
Yeah. So, like I said, you know, it's just a plethora of paranormal activity that they're not even sure what spirit is what, you know. Employees have claimed to see apparitions, you know, like I just said, of people in period clothing. Doors will open and close on their own.
Yeah.
Lights will turn off and on their own. Voices are heard in the hallways when no one is in there. And in the restaurant and lobby all through the night, you know, even when people are sleeping and there's just the staff there, they hear these voices. Visitors and staff have both claimed to have been touched. Things have been moved. The elevator will stop at the third floor, even though no one has pushed the button. And sometimes it will just take off on its own up to the third floor. Now, some think that this may be the spirit of Charlotte Cushman, who died. Her room was on the third floor, and she died in the hotel of pneumonia while she was fighting breast cancer. There's just paranormal activity going on in almost every place in this hotel.
See, my thing
is, if full of it.
We were there, or my luck or your luck, we'd go on the elevator to go up to our room, and a ghost would hit all of the buttons. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. Some people, you know, that's like one guy got on the elevator. He was the only one on there, and he pushed the button for the fourth floor, I think he said. And the elevator stopped on the third floor. He said there was nobody there. Nobody got on, nobody got off. And people have claimed that even when the elevator was empty and nobody even called for the elevator, that the elevator would just go up to the third floor on its own.
Yeah, yeah. See, like, this whole state has, like, so much that you could talk about. And
I know.
Like, hey, guys, after this is over, on the little thing up in the corner, I linked the Wild Vortices show that we talked about with Freetown, Fall River State Forest, and the Huckma Swamp and everything. You guys got to go listen to that, because when we did the research on that, it was crazy, because there was tons of ghostly apparition things that we talked about, the UFO things, the Bigfoot, the Puckawudgie, Dogman. It was some crazy stuff that we talked on that show. And this state just has so much crazy things that are going on. And even when I was trying to just research about the paranormal, I get pulled off into all these weird cryptids that are roaming around. Or you get pulled
It was the same way with me. I would invent, I'd be researching someplace, and then the next thing I knew, it would take me off into a cryptid, and of course that would really catch my attention. And I'd be reading for a while, and I'd have to pull myself away from it, because I'd say, hey, this is not about cryptids this time.
Well, yeah, because we get kind of in the cryptid, because, well, one, I didn't really believe in them until I started encountering them. You know what I mean? When we started encountering the Bigfoots and stuff. And I still have to do a show where, I'm going to share all the photos and the things that I have, because it's... Well, one, I didn't believe everything that was going on, but how much activity keeps continuing to happen, And we promised that we were going to share it one time with you guys and stuff. The main reason why I don't really do it a whole lot, and we do put it in our Spookies Corner group, it's just because, one, I don't want a lot of people going on our property, and two, I don't want them hunting these things. The main reason that I'm starting to reach out now more is because I just want to learn how to coexist with these things and find out more about them, because we already know what the other wildlife is. We just don't know how to coexist with these things, so you know nothing about it. But me and you were talking, like, we weren't sure if we might do a show next week. That might just be a random talking show where we invite you guys just to call in live and share your own paranormal experiences, since it's like a day before Halloween.
Yeah, we haven't really made the decision on that.
Yeah, we're just kind of talking about it and throwing it out there, and maybe we might just have a random talk night where we invite you guys to call in and share your stuff or whatever. We'll see. We're not sure 100%.
Yeah, you can share your ghost stories, you can share your cryptid stories, or share any story you want.
Right, or your experiences or whatever. But, if we do end up doing it, we'll put a link up. But if we do it, and there's somebody who wants to, like, share one of their EVPs or their photos, just send it to us in an email, and maybe we can share it or whatever. We're just not 100% sure, but that's just something that we were thinking about. But, I guess that...
Yeah, and we'll post an announcement in the next couple days.
Yeah, for sure. If we end up...
Of what we're going to do for sure.
Yeah, for the future anyways. But it's just something we're thinking about, maybe doing something on the 30th or whatever. But, I don't know, Spooky, just want to tell people thanks or whatever?
Like I said, we'll post an announcement of what we're going to do next in the next couple days. And I want to thank Rusty Reporter, Doppelganger, Native Earth Lady, Alex, Richard. Those are our mods. I hope I didn't forget anybody for doing a good job. I want to thank everybody for coming in and listening to us, after we've been gone all this time and we ran over time.
Yeah. Sorry about the error we had a little bit with the connection too. So.
Right. And I just want to thank you all for everybody that came into chat and who's listening that's not in chat. We really, really appreciate you guys sticking with us and coming back to listen to us. And I just can't say thank you enough.
Yeah. We enjoy really reading the chat and reading the emails and everything. So. And
we get really good people in our chat. I'll tell you.
Interesting stuff all the time, and good humor.
We get interesting stuff in there. We've got really good people in there, and I appreciate it.
Yeah. So anybody who's listening to this podcast in the future, try to catch a live show, because you might make new friends. Because
that's right.
And that's mainly why we kind of started this, was to find other people who've had encounters and experiences that we can talk with and whatever. But thank you guys all for coming. If you guys want to get show reminders, you can either click here on YouTube next to our Spooky Raven name and subscribe, or you can send us an email at anythingbutordinary@live.com, letting us know if you guys want to get show reminders. Well, I don't know if we're really doing that anymore, but you can email us if you want to contact us and give us like show ideas or friendly banter, or share.
Oh yeah, because we
share even your encounters with us or whatever.
Right. And we get to our listeners' requests just as soon as we can.
Yeah.
And actually, we've been doing several
of them all the time. Most of them are always a viewer request.
And they're all good. That's why we try to get to them, because our listeners just come up with some great stuff.
Yeah, there's some stuff that I haven't even thought of, and then they bring us to such cool things. Also, you guys can find us on Facebook, and you can like and subscribe there, and then you'll get, you know, our upcoming show reminders off of Facebook. But we hope you guys have like a great week. We'll let you know if we're going to be on the 30th. If not, you'll see a new link coming eventually soon. We won't be gone as long, we promise. But everybody have a great night, and we'll talk to you soon.
Good night, everyone. And thank you.